In July 2026, a thrilling cross-border crackdown is unfolding in the financial circles of Wall Street and Beijing. A group of mysterious operatives from the Chinese Communist Party's officialdom suspected of insider trading have caught the attention of the U.S. Department of Justice. A group of invisible figures lurking in the shadows of mainland China suddenly went wild in the few hours before the U.S. stock market closed, pouring a staggering $12 million into an obscure bet that no one usually touched. As a result, in less than 24 hours, these people pulled off a heist without lifting a finger, netting over $100 million in profit, a return of more than 900%. However, what they thought was a flawless operation was brought to an end by a single lawsuit. On July 3rd, major financial media outlets like Bloomberg and Coxon broke the news of a lawsuit that sent shockwaves through the entire financial world. A judge at the U.S. federal court in Manhattan, New York, has officially issued an emergency asset freeze order and subpoenas. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the Department of Justice, and even the FBI have all stepped in and are now fully involved. How exactly did the Chinese Communist Party elite and privileged class manage to reach their black hands into Wall Street, skillfully exploiting America's free system to launder money on a massive scale and pull off these schemes without putting in any real capital? And how has their previously unstoppable privileged black box operation now been tightly restrained and subjected to cross-border sanctions by the iron fist of American justice? Hello everyone, this is Weiyu Looks at the World, and I'm Chen Weiyu. Today, we're going to take a look at how the CCP elite have used insider information to amass huge fortunes, and how the United States, in turn, has used high technology to brilliantly turn the tables and trap them. Anyone who invests in stocks has probably heard of the famous Futu Securities and Tiger Brokers. These two companies are basically the main channels for mainland Chinese funds to trade US and Hong Kong stocks, and they've always operated in a regulatory gray area under the CCP. On May 22nd of this year, the China Securities Regulatory Commission and 7 other departments joined forces to launch a massive crackdown, dropping a bombshell by accusing Futu and Tiger Brokers of illegally operating cross-border businesses. Futu was slapped with a hefty fine of 1.85 billion yuan, while Tiger Brokers was fined and had assets confiscated totaling 410 million yuan. As soon as the news broke, both companies' stock prices plummeted by more than 30% in pre-market trading on the U.S. stock exchange. Under normal circumstances, this would be a major piece of negative news, and the market should be filled with wailing and despair. But in the back-end system of Interactive Brokers, the largest online brokerage in the U.S., the celebration had already ended long before. Recently, with Professor Sun Guoxiang from Nanhua University and other experts decoding the U.S. indictment, we discovered that between May 7th and May 21st, about 9 new or usually extremely inactive, mysterious accounts quietly appeared in the back end of Interactive Brokers. As soon as these 9 accounts were opened, they did something that no one could understand. They didn't buy stocks. Instead, they specifically bought deep out-of-the-money put options for Futu and Tiger Brokers. What exactly are deep out-of-the-money put options? You can think of them as an extremely aggressive kind of betting agreement. For example, if Futu's stock price is $90 today, you spend a small amount of money to buy a contract, betting that it will plunge to $50 within a few days. Because from a normal market perspective, the chances of a perfectly fine company suddenly losing nearly half its value in just a few days are almost zero. So these kinds of contracts are so cheap in the market, they're basically like scrap paper and nobody usually touches them. If you guess wrong and the stock doesn't drop or only drops a little, then the principal you invested will be completely wiped out when the contract expires. It'll just turn into worthless paper. But if a black swan event really does happen and the stock price actually falls below $50 in a very short time, then the value of this contract will skyrocket, increasing explosively by hundreds or even thousands of times. In the financial world, this is called a high-leverage lottery ticket. Normally, when people buy lottery tickets, they might spend a few hundred or a few thousand yuan at most just to try their luck. But these 9 mysterious accounts, it's as if they received some kind of cold, calculated order. They kept pouring money in, frantically hoarding these worthless papers, and within 2 weeks, they bought a total of 200,000 put options. The real madness unfolded in a few short hours before the US stock market closed on May 21st. At this point, there were only a few hours left before these option contracts expired. There was no sign at all that Futu and Tiger were going to drop. However, this group of mysterious accounts seemed completely confident. In the final hours before the market closed, they suddenly unleashed a tidal wave of capital, pouring in $12 million to frantically buy up every single put option on the market. Sure enough, as soon as the market opened the next day, the stock price crashed. Those put options hoarded by the 9 mysterious accounts, which were about to become worthless, suddenly multiplied in value tenfold, even dozens of times, in just 1 second. In a single day, they made a net profit of $100 million, with a return rate as high as 900%. This group of mysterious traders, taking advantage of the time difference across the Pacific, pulled off a nearly unprecedented, hour-perfect short sell in the history of global finance. There's a line in the indictment: when the chief risk officer and the quantitative team at Hina International later reviewed the trade, they broke out in a cold sweat. They said, "The precision of this trade has already surpassed the limits of human market analysis." If these people had bought 2 days earlier or 2 days later, their funds would have been completely wiped out due to the time decay of the options value. It was as if they had precisely calculated the exact moment when Chinese regulators would officially drop their bombshell announcement for reforms. Hina even wrote angrily in the lawsuit that this mysterious group from China snatched over $100 million in a single move, calling it an outright plundering of the U.S. financial market and our families. There's no such thing as a free lunch. The $100 million pocketed by this mysterious group had to come from somewhere, right? So who ended up being the unlucky one? It was Hina International. Speaking of Hina, those who don't trade stocks might not have heard of it, but on Wall Street, it's definitely a major player, a true giant. It's one of the largest options market makers in the world. So what exactly is a market maker? To put it simply, they're like convenience stores in the financial markets. If you want to buy or sell options and there aren't enough regular people to take the other side of your trade, the market maker has to step in and be your counterparty. No questions asked. If you want to buy, they have to sell to you. If you want to sell, they have to buy from you. They don't make money from the ups and downs of stock prices, but from the tiny difference between buying and selling prices. To prevent themselves from losing money, companies like Citadel have some of the world's top mathematicians, physicists, and supercomputers. They've developed extremely complex quantitative models. So whenever a large buy order appears in the market, their computers will automatically buy other stocks or futures to hedge the risk. It's like they're wearing a bulletproof vest. But this time, Citadel never imagined that their bulletproof vest would actually be pierced by a single shot. On the afternoon of May 21st, when those 9 mysterious accounts suddenly rushed in and specifically wanted to buy tens of thousands of FUT put options, Citadel's computer system, due to the market maker's legal obligations, was forced to take on this order. At the time, Citadel's quantitative model calculated that this was just some speculators making wild bets right before the market closed and considered it normal market noise. But while they were asleep, it was daytime in China, and earth-shattering changes were taking place. The China Securities Regulatory Commission announced penalties against Futu and Tiger brokers, and their stock prices quickly crashed. So early the next morning, alarms were blaring throughout Citadel's risk control hall, and the numbers on the big screen were all in the red. In just a few minutes, Citadel's losses on paper skyrocketed to $71,400,000. This was basically daylight robbery. The higher-ups at Citadel immediately realized that this was no coincidence, but a targeted attack aimed specifically at Citadel. That night, Citadel legal team and top quantitative experts all canceled their vacations, stayed up all night, frantically pulled up trading data from the past 2 weeks, and drafted a 23-page emergency lawsuit. This lawsuit revealed a truly shocking statistic. During those days in mid-May, the trading volume from these mysterious accounts actually accounted for more than 70% of all options trading volume on Futu and Tiger brokers in the entire U.S. market. It's like a convenience store that usually only sells a few bottles of Coke a day, and then suddenly, one day, a group of mysterious people show up and pre-order all the Coke the store would sell for the next week. Then, the next day, the government suddenly announces that Coke is being fully recalled and refunded because the formula is toxic. These mysterious people then show up at the convenience store with empty bottles, demanding huge compensation. Heine felt like he had been set up. In the lawsuit, Heine used extremely angry legal language, writing, "This is by no means normal market activity. This is a textbook case of meticulously planned insider trading. The defendants took advantage of the high leverage in the U.S. options market and having access to regulatory secrets that were absolutely undisclosed by the Chinese government, carried out a precise and fraudulent hunt against legitimate U.S. market makers." This is the part of the story that is the most infuriating and also the most thought-provoking for us. How exactly did the CCP's elites and insiders so skillfully parasitize and manipulate the American system? Everyone wants to know, how did this earth-shattering secret worth $100 million actually leak out from the heavily guarded building of the China Securities Regulatory Commission? Professor Sun Guoxiang, a renowned professor of international relations and strategic economics at Nanhua University, has provided a very clear analytical framework. He points out that, judging from the timeline and nature of the entire incident, the information leaking from mainland China is, logically speaking, an extremely natural and entirely reasonable preliminary conclusion. Think about it. Futu and Tiger brokers are facing a hefty fine of $1.85 billion. In the Chinese Communist Party's bureaucratic system, a red-letter document of this level is absolutely a core secret. Before it is officially announced on the CSRC's website, every step in the circulation of this secret is actually filled with enormous financial temptation. Specifically, there are three main potential risk points for information leakage. The first risk point is the core regulatory layer, meaning the key officials and secretaries within the China Securities Regulatory Commission who are directly responsible for investigating these brokerages, reviewing penalties, and handling legal compliance along this entire line. Under the CCP's rule, because there is a lack of oversight over power, many officials' salaries may not look high, but the administrative approval and penalty authority they hold in the financial market is worth a fortune. A change in the penalty amount or moving up the announcement time can mean billions gained or lost. The second risk point is the compliance layer within the brokerages. This refers to the senior executives and key compliance personnel involved at Futu Securities and Tiger brokers. Many people might ask, if the company is about to be fined, which is terrible news, how could the executives possibly leak that information? Well, that just means you don't really understand how things work with Chinese characteristics. In many Chinese companies listed overseas, the executives and the powerful shareholders behind the scenes are two completely different groups. When executives realize the company is beyond saving and doomed to disaster, their most natural reaction isn't to go down with the company, but to use their insider knowledge to quietly open anonymous accounts overseas and then short their own company. It doesn't matter if the company collapses, as long as he makes a few $100 million by shorting the stock in the U.S. market, he can still live as a rich man overseas for the rest of his life. Now, ordinary people might see this as betrayal, but in elite circles, this is called risk hedging. The third key point is an intermediate step that people often overlook, which is the advance notification stage. According to China's administrative penalty law and the usual practice of the China Securities Regulatory Commission, before officially announcing a penalty decision to the public, regulatory authorities typically deliver an advance administrative penalty notice to the company involved a few days or even a week or two in advance in order to hear the company's statements and defenses. Now think about it. Once this advance notice is delivered, the number of people in the know instantly expands. From the regulatory staff delivering the notice, to the legal teams at the securities firms, to the lawyers and accountants they hire, and even the various political backers behind the securities firms. In this complex web of interests, everyone gets to see that glaring penalty amount. When faced with huge interests, confidentiality agreements are nothing but worthless pieces of paper. All it takes is a casual message sent through WeChat or an encrypted app, and this billion-dollar secret ends up in the hands of the traders. However, I think that for these traders to go all in the night before the China Securities Regulatory Commission makes its official announcement, it's probably not just a simple case of an ordinary leak. Professor Sun Guoxiang also specifically mentioned that following standard financial investigation procedures, tracing back to find out who the insider is isn't actually that difficult from a technical standpoint. You can proceed along 3 lines at the same time. First, check the circulation records and timestamps of internal documents within the CSRC and the brokerage firms. Second, use technical means to retrieve the communication and social network records of relevant insiders during those days. Third, track the offshore remittance traces behind those mysterious accounts in the United States. Technically, this is feasible, but politically, the Chinese Communist Party may not cooperate at all, because it's very likely that the person behind the scenes is a relative of a high-ranking CCP official. So does that mean the United States has no way to deal with this? For a long time, Wall Street has maintained market prosperity by establishing an extremely free and efficient options trading system, offering extremely high leverage. So what is the foundation of this system? It's the spirit of contract. Everyone assumes that nobody knows the outcome in advance, and they compete fairly in the fog of uncertainty. But this pack of wolves raised within the CCP system knows the ins and outs of America's free system all too well. In their eyes, America's inclusiveness and freedom are the biggest loopholes. They take advantage of the absolute insider information generated by the power black box in mainland China and then go to the United States, the freest and most highly leveraged market, to amplify it. Essentially, this kind of behavior is using the black box of a dictatorship to loot the wealth of the free market. They believe that as long as the transactions take place in the United States, the funds go through offshore accounts, and there's no way to trace them in China, nor can American courts do anything about it, then they can always hide behind the scenes, enjoying privileges within the system while fleecing Wall Street and global investors. But there's one thing they miscalculated. The reason the United States is called a superpower isn't just because of Wall Street, but even more so because behind Wall Street, there's a judicial system that, although it may operate slowly, becomes incredibly powerful once it's set in motion. The most formidable move of the American judicial system is what's called the long-arm jurisdiction, and there's also a sophisticated big data surveillance network that specializes in dealing with anyone who refuses to comply. Even though the case took place between Beijing and New York, and the person leaking information might be sipping tea in an office in Beijing, as long as your trading activity happens on servers in the United States and you're making money off American market makers, you automatically fall under the jurisdiction of U.S. law. At the same time that Heine Company filed the lawsuit at the end of June, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice's Criminal Division had already launched a swift and forceful intervention. These traders thought that by using offshore accounts with interactive brokers or by hiding behind layers of shell companies, they could conceal their identities. But in the face of modern financial technology, none of these cover-ups work. The USSC has an ultimate weapon in its hands called the Consolidated Audit Trail, or CAT for short. This system is a cutting-edge financial big data technology developed by the U.S. in recent years. It can track every single transaction in real time across all U.S. stock and options markets, capturing every microsecond level action from order placement and modification to execution. No matter how many shell companies you set up, whether you're registered in the Cayman Islands or the British Virgin Islands, when you open an account, you must submit the ultimate beneficiary's real name authentication, passport information, bank transaction records, and the IP address used when placing orders to the brokerage. Under the scrutiny of the CAT system, the sources of funds behind these 9 mysterious accounts, the physical addresses of the devices they operate from, and even the perfectly synchronized trading patterns among them at the same time will instantly form a clear behavioral map on the computer screen. That's exactly why, just the day before yesterday, the federal judge had no hesitation in directly approving Haina's request to issue subpoenas to major brokerage firms, forcibly obtaining the real identity information of the account holders. In front of the SEC, the true identities of the traders are basically laid bare. It's only a matter of time before they're exposed. However, even though their identities can be found out, actually convicting this group of people of insider trading in a U.S. federal court still faces strict legal thresholds. Moreover, with the Chinese Communist Party deliberately obstructing cross-border investigations, it's very difficult for U.S. prosecutors to just go to Beijing and search securities regulators' phones to get chat records of their profit sharing. This adds a certain level of uncertainty to the whole case. But this doesn't mean that the United States is powerless. This is precisely where the brilliance of the American system lies. Maybe it's hard for me to send you to an American prison, but I can give you the financial death penalty. This huge profit of over $100 million is now tightly locked in accounts at U.S. brokerages like Interactive Brokers. Not a single cent can be withdrawn or transferred. So what will ultimately happen to this group of mysterious people? First of all, the U.S. Department of Justice has every right to issue a red notice through Interpol against the traders involved and the insiders behind them, what everyone commonly calls a red notice. But even with a red notice, since there is no extradition treaty between China and the U.S., the Chinese Communist Party would absolutely never hand over its elite officials or insiders to the American justice system. So if these suspects spend their entire lives staying put in mainland China and never take a single step outside, then the U.S. really has no way to send federal marshals to Beijing to arrest them. But for this group of people who went to such great lengths and took political risks to steal insider information and short U.S. stocks, what is their ultimate goal? It's certainly not to get rich by staying in mainland China. As for these Chinese elites, they're desperately trying to move their money out of the country. Their ultimate dream is to transfer their assets overseas, get a foreign green card, send their wives and children to the US, Canada, or Europe, and then, after they retire, go to the West to enjoy the sunshine, beaches, and the freedom of fresh air. And this move by the US, issuing remote arrest warrants and freezing assets, hits them right where it hurts most. Once they step outside the country and go to any nation that has an extradition treaty with the U.S., they could end up being extradited to America, just like how the U.S. captured that Chinese hacker, Zhu Ziwei. For the Chinese Communist Party elites, this is a psychological torment that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. For the rest of their lives, they'll be trapped within mainland China, unable to visit their children studying in the U.S., and unable to vacation in Europe ever again. They have to live every moment with the risk and anxiety that their identities might be exposed and that they could be arrested by the United States. What's even more ironic is that since this money is completely frozen in the United States, it's highly likely that HNA International's losses will ultimately be fully compensated through a court ruling using these frozen assets. In other words, these insiders risked their political careers and even imprisonment, but in the end, not only did they not get a single cent, they actually ended up helping Wall Street market makers legally hedge their risks while winding up as lifelong fugitives themselves. Isn't this the greatest irony? At this point, have you noticed that what appears on the surface to be a Wall Street financial case actually reflects a much deeper life and death struggle over national security and ideology? At the launch ceremony for the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States this year, President Trump delivered a historically significant and powerful speech. In this speech, Trump was unreserved and called out democratic socialism and communism directly, naming them as the main ideological challenges and national threats currently facing the United States. He pointed out in his speech that the United States is facing a resurgence of the communist threat, with some new immigrants and certain left-wing politicians advocating ideas that run counter to American values, and that communism is, in fact, an enemy of the U.S. Constitution. In the past, many Westerners always felt that communism was something far removed from them, just history and textbooks or something happening on the other side of the Pacific. But this time, the short-selling case of Futu and Tiger brokers delivered a shocking lesson to Wall Street and to American society as a whole in an extremely blatant way. The toxins of communism and crony capitalism have already seeped into the very core of America's financial heart. Just think about it. This group of elites cultivated within the Chinese communist system, on one hand, uses communist ideology and the power of official red-stamped authority to crush private enterprises and manipulate the market at will back home. On the other hand, they seamlessly switch gears and skillfully exploit the freedom, inclusiveness, and high-leverage tools of the American capital markets to launder money for themselves and plunder the wealth of legitimate American market makers. This is exactly what Trump expressed concern about in his speech, the erosion of the free world by communism. It's not about attacking with tanks, but rather exploiting the tolerance and loopholes of your system, parasitizing you from within, and draining you dry. But the way this case is unfolding now also perfectly confirms what Trump said. America must and is indeed ushering in a comprehensive awakening. In the past, Wall Street and certain Western politicians would always turn a blind eye to the CCP's operations of converting power into cross-border assets through opaque means, all for the sake of their own interests. But this time, when Wall Street giants like HNA International were precisely targeted, and when over $100 million in dirty money tried to flee New York before dawn, the U.S. Department of Justice, the FBI, and the big data surveillance network struck with lightning speed and intercepted them on the spot. This sent an unmistakably clear signal. America's tolerance for the CCP elite has dropped to zero. The free world is building a steel barrier and has begun a comprehensive purge of these communist financial moles who have been parasitizing the free system. All right, that's all for today's sharing. If you enjoy my program, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with more friends. Thank you all, and see you next time.